Welcome to the second episode of Oriental Nightmares Presents Asian Directors. In the previous episode, I explored Na Hong-jun's work and the significance of social issues and human rights in South Korean cinema. This episode looks at the work of YEON Sang-ho, whose latest film, Colony, like director Na's Hope, premiered at the recent Cannes Film Festival. Given Yeon's prolific output compared to Na, this episode focuses on key films and thematic concerns rather than covering the director's entire body of work. One striking aspect of director Yeon's oeuvre is his seamless transition between animation and live-action films. This is rare, with only a handful of directors achieving such successful cross-medium integration. Tim Burton and Wes Anderson are perhaps the most renowned for their aesthetic sensibilities, seamlessly crossing over between mediums. This episode begins with a close look at Yeon's animated films, before reflecting on his zombie quartet, Seoul Station, Train to Busan, Peninsula, and Going Home. I'm not including Colony in this discussion because it's set in a different universe. It's not an extension or expansion of the universe that already exists. Then I'll look at Yeon's The Ugly, a low-budget character study, which is quite different from the high-budget action films he's known for outside of Korea, although it shares aesthetic and thematic sensibilities like his other films. Finally, I'll discuss Yeon's most recent film, Colony. I wrote a review of this for Eastern Kicks, and I'll discuss its key inspiration and think about how it's transformed the zombie genre. As an example of how popular the film is, Colony is on track to become Yeon's most popular film yet, connecting with audiences worldwide and breaking box office records. Born in Seoul, YEON Sang-ho earned a degree in Western painting from Sangnyang University. He founded his animation studio, Studio Dada Show, in 2004. Initially, the studio focused on adult animated films, but has since broadened its scope to include child-friendly content, for example, Kai 2016. Their debut feature, The King of Pigs, 2011, secured the NetPAC Award at the Busan International Film Festival and made history as the first Korean animated film to be invited to the Cannes Film Festival. The follow-up, The Fake, 2013, triumphed at City's Film Festival, winning Best Animated Feature Film. Subsequently, the studio has ventured into R-rated erotic film with Shining Modern History, 2014, a direct adaptation of the webcomic of the same name. Since 2016, Studio Dada Show has collaborated closely with Red Peter Films, producing Seoul Station, 2016, a prequel to the acclaimed Train to Busan of the same date. While his animated films were popular, it was his first live-action film, Train to Busan, that introduced director Yeon to a global audience. This was also the same year as The Wailing that I talked about in terms of director Na in the last episode. He followed up Train to Busan with Psychokinesis in 2018, then Train to Busan Extended Edition in 2020, Peninsula 2020, The Ugly 2025, and finally Colony 2026. In addition to his work on animated cinema and live action film, he has also been responsible for a number of TV productions as director, writer, and even showrunner. Hellbound is an adaptation of Yeon's manga of the same name. First series premiered in 2021 and the second in 2024. He also took up scriptwriting duties for Parasite the Grey. In addition to this, he was a writer for a 2020 Korean TV series, The Curse, which was extended in 2 films directed by Hong Won-ki. In 2022, Yeon's The King of Pigs was adapted for the small screen, written by Tak Jae-young and directed by Kim Dae-jin. Finally, Young served as showrunner for the TV adaptation of the seminal 1960 Toho film, The Human Vapor, directed by Honda. If you know Japanese cinema, you'll recognize the name. He was responsible for Godzilla in 1954, one of the most consequential films in horror science fiction cinema. If you watch the TV series, Young's studio show is directly referenced in one of the episodes. Part 1, Animating Horror. Young's first animated short film, Held Two Lives, 2003, is a 34-minute adult animation split into two parts. It lays down many of the themes and concerns that we can see in his work, especially around what it means to be human and the amorphous boundary between good and evil. It also provides the foundations for the rules and regulations of divine decrees and executioners or reapers that are central to his work. Part 1, The Man's Story, follows an ordinary salaryman whose life takes a dramatic turn when he's visited by an angel of death. He's given a countdown warning the monsters from hell are coming to drag him away. He tries, as does the woman in the second part, to escape his fate. The second part, The Woman's Story, centres on Jae-young, a woman in her mid-20s who is also visited by an angel of death, but instead of being told that she's going to hell, she's told that she's going to go to heaven. However, this suits her no better than the salaryman going to hell, and she tries to escape her fate. The story world was later expanded into a webtoon series, Hell, a digital comic adaptation later released in English as Hellbound. Finally, the Netflix series reimagined the narrative as a large-scale, live-action, political and religious thriller spanning 2 major seasons from 2021 to 2024. Love is Protein is a 24-minute animated short film from 2008. Serves as a precursor to his zombie films, by exploring the workings of the capitalist machine and its moral implications. The film demonstrates how compartmentalization denies the suffering of others. Consider the Holocaust, what unimaginable atrocities, including gas chambers, work camps, and scientific experiments on vulnerable people, were enabled through denial and displacement. Love is Protein takes place one sweltering night where 3 struggling roommates, Jae-hoo, Kyung-sung and Hong-chan, decide to order food in. However, they're short of cash. Desperate, they smash open what looks like a living piggy bank to gather enough loose change for fried chicken. When the delivery driver arrives, he's a massive anthropomorphic pig who hands them a plate of jokbal, which is braised pig's totters, by mistake. Shortly after, a giant whipping rooster arrives at the door. The rooster breaks down and reveals the horrifying truth. The fried chicken they ordered was his own son, whom he had to sell and fried to pay bills. While 2 roommates grapple with the ethics of the situation, the third remains unfazed, hungrily devouring the chicken while the father watches in despair. This scene highlights how upper or middle class comfort depends on the unseen destruction, labour and heartbreak of the working classes. This class conflict and the gap between those with money and those without is a recurring theme in director Yeon's work, which I'll discuss in the following analysis of his zombie quartet of films. I want to finish this section by briefly considering director Yeon's first animated feature film, The King of Pigs. The story follows 2 old classmates, Kwang Min and Jung Suk, who reconnect after 15 years. Their middle school years were traumatic, as the school was divided into 2 rigid social classes, powerful and rich bullies, or the dogs, and the poor and dispossessed students who are called pigs. As the two men reminisce, they uncover the dark secrets of their youth and the tragic fate of one of their classmates named Cole. The division of students into two hierarchical groups makes overt reference to William Harding's Lord of Flies, which is about class conflict and social hierarchies. However, while this is seen in the book as a consequence of social order breaking down, when a group of boys are stranded on a deserted island, in King of Pigs it is embedded within institutions. The school system creates and recreates social hierarchies, which is reinforced during mandatory military enlistment. At the same time, these institutions also construct gender hierarchies, which we can also see in The King of Pigs. Not only does the film tackle classroom bullying, but it also directly references domestic violence, which festers in a society of misogyny. This is shown in the opening scene, which visualises the ultimate consequence of male violence against women. Kung Min's dead wife is shown against the kitchen table. In the first shot, we see Kung Min, and we see the wife at the back in the background. In the second shot, we actually get a close-up of the wife herself. The themes of King of Pigs are as relevant today as they were at the time. In the first episode in the series, I talked about South Korean cinema as fundamentally tied to issues of human rights and solidarity. While The King of Pigs is largely hyper-realistic, it is punctured through by moments of the fantastic. An example of this would be the dead cat that returns to haunt the protagonist, a symbol of their guilt. All in all, King of Pigs offers an unremitting and realist vision of the vagaries of daily life and how the disruption of the past in the present engages with the persistence of trauma at both a personal and societal level. Section 2, the Zombie Quadrilogy. While director YEON's most recent film, Colony, is a zombie film, it is not set in the same universe. As it stands, this series currently consists of live-action films Train to Busan and Peninsula, an animated feature, Seoul Station, and an animated short, The Way Home. Zombies and social criticism have gone together since George Romero reinvented the genre for a modern era with the groundbreaking The Night of the Living Dead in 1968. YEON Sang-ho's third animated feature is a prequel to the live-action Train to Busan, released in August, just a month after the latter. Set around Seoul Station, the film chronicles the initial outbreak of the zombie virus in South Korea, with the action unfolding over the course of one night. Instead of the morality of eating meat through a disavowal of its animalistic origin, as we saw in Love is Protein, Seoul Station asks if eating people is wrong. The film begins with an old man bleeding to death from a gaping neck wound, while busy commuters and the police ignore his plight. When dead, the homeless man becomes a voracious, flesh-eating zombie, spreading the infection among the massive homeless population sheltering in the hub, who, once zombified, turn their appetites and attention to those who ignored, oppressed and marginalised them in life. The film follows his son, former sex worker, as she tries to reunite with her boyfriend Ki Wong. Simultaneously, Suk-di, her father, searches for his runaway daughter, ironically enlisting Ki Wong's help in order to do so. However, Ki Wong's motivation is financial, and Suk-ki isn't who he says he is. In addition, a full-on lockdown imposed by Seoul authorities complicates matters, blurring the lines between the human and the non-human. While the trio eventually meet up, none of them find salvation or escape. The film posits that the social structures of greed, prostitution and capitalism are far more terrifying, cruel and inescapable than the literal zombies. The muted perpetual grey tone focuses on the desolate soul trapped on life's margins, a recurring theme in Jung's work. Train to Busan follows the Gothic trope of isolating a diverse group of people and pitting them against a monstrous other, or others, as the case is here. The setting for most of the action is a KTX-1 Korea Train Express bullet train from Seoul Station to Busan, keeping in mind that Seoul Station is where the virus originated. The zombies are not the slow shuffling sort, they're quick, learn through trial and error, and some manage to retain their humanity to the end. The conclusion we might draw is that the zombies are not the bad people here, but it's the humans who are the bad people and are situated as worse than zombies. The film plot centres on Si-Koo, played by Gon-yu, a workaholic and emotionally distant fund manager, and his young daughter, Si-an, played by Kim So-an, who are travelling from Seoul to Busan so that Su-an can see her mother. Just as the doors close, an affected woman boards, triggering a rapid and terrifying zombie apocalypse that turns the train into a speeding death trap. On the train are Sang-ho, played by Ma Dong-seok, and his pregnant wife Song-kyung, Jung Yu-mi. Sang-ho teams up with So-ko to protect the others, while high-ranking company executive Young Sook's only concern is that he survives, and attempts to engineer the situation so that the hierarchical structures are maintained and determine who lives and who dies. Set 4 years after Train to Busan, Peninsula sets the action in the liminal spaces between Hong Kong and Korea, where those who've survived the initial outbreak struggle to cope in this brave new world. Once again, it's not the zombies themselves that are a threat to life, but rather the humans. Here it's those that seek to eke out a living by scavenging. Peninsula pits human against human amongst desperate survivors who have nothing to lose. The film opens with a prologue, which documents the zombie outbreak from Train to Busan, the mass exodus from Korea, and the desertion and isolation of the country. In his haste to escape, protagonist Jung Suk, played by Dong Won-gang, ignores a hitchhiking mother, Min Jung, played by Lee Jong-hyun, who he passes on the road. He then loses his sister and nephew to a zombie outbreak aboard the freighter en route to Hong Kong. 4 years later, he and his brother-in-law Chung Myung, played by Kim Do-young, are roped into a shady deal to return to Incheon to recover a truck full with money. Unfortunately, Chung Myung is captured and forced to fight zombies in a cage, whilst those around bet on who survives. Ironically, Jung Suk is rescued by Min Jung's two daughters, Jung E, played by Lee Ra, and Yu Jin, played by Lee Yi Won. In Peninsula, the father-daughter relationship in Train is replaced by Jung Suk's quest for absolution from his guilt, which is embodied in both his abandonment of Min Jung and his failure to protect his and Chung Min's family. The final film in the quadrilogy is The Way Home 2017, which is set in the same universe as the other films. While the short is not available to watch, there are details available in terms of the content of the film. It is set during the continuing citywide zombie apocalypse, and the narrative follows two men, one chosen by drawing straws and the other a 40-year-old volunteer, who brave the infected zone to secure daily necessities. The film was notably screened at the Bucheon International Fantastic Film Festival, Busan. It serves as bite-sized thematic continuity of the dystopian horror universe established in his earlier zombie films, Train to Busan and Seoul Station. Section 3, Facing the Truth. The Ugly follows Lim Dong-han, who is investigating the 40-year-old murder of his estranged mother, Jung Yong-hee, alongside a documentary crew filming his blind, stamp-carving father, Lim Yong-gyu. During the process of the investigation, Dong-hwan discovers his mother was cruelly mocked for her perceived ugliness. The film alternates between present-day investigations and past events, highlighting the enduring impact of transgenerational and intergenerational trauma. The Korean economic miracle, or miracle on Han River, as it's commonly known, was built on the sacrifices of working people who believed their hard work would secure better futures for their children. However, it only widened the gap between the privileged and the underprivileged. The grueling work schedules, often ranging from 60 to 80 hours per week in hazardous conditions, left workers underpaid for their labour and exploited, sexually or otherwise, by those in charge. In the ugly, the garment factory where Yong-hee worked serves as a stark example of the hardships faced by the working class during the economic miracle era. Beyond the backbreaking work, she and her fellow factory women endure physical and sexual abuse. When a friend is raped, Young-hee refuses to remain silent, becoming a thorn in the side of the factory owners. Her husband, Yong-gui, instead of standing up for her, becomes a drinking buddy and complicit with those who regularly abuse women. Young rejects conventional filmic logic and screen spectator identification by omitting Jung Yong-hee's face in the flashback sequences. This invites the audience into her inner world, making a symbol of the judgments and shame society imposes on women. At a press conference, Young explained his motivation for the project. He said, "I was fixated on my achievements and my origins. This led me to questions about what was lost and what was exploited during Korea's rapid modernization in the 1970s. I began the story by creating the ironic character of Lim Young-gi, who overcame his visual impairment, and his counterpart, Jung Yong-hee." Section 4, The New Flesh. I'm going to begin this section with briefly quoting myself from a review I did for Eastern Kicks. Open quotation. Opening to a record-breaking domestic box office, Colony has not only outpaced director Yeon's other zombie films, but is also one of the highest-grossing and most popular films thus far of 2026 in South Korea, holding records of the fastest film to 2 million and 5 million viewers. While its bombastic action may be a step too far for the Academy, Colony is also surprisingly positive, alluding to biotechnologies and viruses on a macro level, and school bullying, women's and disabled people's rights on a micro level. As such, it feels spiritually closer to Seoul Station than his other zombie films. It is also reminiscent of the latter in that it is female-centered, although less tragic, with male heroism situated as inadequate and ineffective, leading up to women to save the day, confounding and subverting gendered expectations, end quote. In Seoul, a biotechnology presentation and shopping centre becomes a setting for a deliberate zombie virus release. The government attempts to contain the outbreak by sealing the building, trapping a group of survivors. These survivors face both internal and external threats, as the zombies represent a new stage of development. Infected individuals can share information, evolving over time and becoming more intelligent than their human counterparts. Two women, both biotechnologists, Kwon Si-jung, played by Jiana Jung, and Kwon Si-hee, played by Shin Hee-bin, must save the day. Their relationship with Han Gui-song, played by Gu So, So Jung's ex and Sohee's current husband, highlights the similarities. Having already done an extensive review, I'll now focus on the film's visual references to other films and argues that Colony the film is a zombie itself. The most obvious frame of reference is the body horror films of the Canadian auteur David Cronenberg. His films Brood and Videodrome are particularly noteworthy. In The Brood, Nola, a severely disturbed woman, is embroiled in a legal battle with husband Frank for custody of the 5-year-old daughter Candice. The title alludes to Nola's perpetual state of pregnancy and the children she gives birth to. Towards the climax of the film, Frank is set upon by Nola's children as he enters their room and they jump on him, hitting and biting him. In Connolly, the survivors discover a secret lab where experiments had taken place on monkeys. As they enter the room, the infected monkeys jump from ceiling cages, trapping them. Further, in both cases, experimental science has taken place in order to extend the idea of what the human is. There is also reference to Videodrome, and in particular the idea of the new flesh with which the film closes, without being able to offer us an image of what this evolved human would look like. Connolly, we could say, directly quotes the work of Cronenberg, both visually and within the dialogue. And while Cronenberg's Scanners is not quoted here, a comparison of the covers of Scanners and Young's latest project, The Human Vapor, is evident. We can also find references to the 1979 version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, starring Donald Sutherland. It's clear with a comparison of the two skills that the reference is deliberate. Further, Young's zombies operate through a hive mind, as do the body snatchers in the former. And of course, I can't end this discussion of references, allusions to, metaphors, intertextuality without talking about George Romero's seminal Dawn of the Dead. In both films, survivors from zombie outbreak become trapped in a shopping mall, operating as a clear criticism of consumerism and late capitalism. Conclusion. While not all films by Young feature literal zombies, they all explore the human cost of rapid modernisation during late-stage capitalism. Protagonists in Young's films often come from marginalised groups like sex workers, factory workers, students and delivery drivers. These characters frequently face difficult choices and ultimately make poor decisions, as seen in Hell 2 Lives and The Ugly. Their antagonists are usually middle upper class figures like CEOs, political influence, such as Seo Young-chol in Connolly. His work also serves as a direct commentary on Korean society hierarchical structure and implicitly criticises structural and institutional misogyny in contemporary Korea. This is evident in films like Seoul Station and King of Pigs. Further, his concept of hell and the rules and regulations within it raises the question, why do people follow rules that are detrimental to them? In academic terms, Louise Althusser's theory of interpolation is particularly useful to answer the question is why do people act against their own interests? Althusser coined the term to address a key question in Marxist theory concerning the conflict between those who own the means of production and those who work for them. Marx predicted that a communist society would naturally emerge from this conflict, leading to a more equal society. However, this hasn't happened. Interpolation was developed as an explanatory framework for understanding why people follow rather than resist rules. Althusser argues that the human subject is constituted or constructed by pre-existing structures or ideological subject formation. He says that if we're named or hailed as a member of a group, such as a lecturer talking to you as students, a police officer calling your name in the street and you turn around, this leads to people perceiving themselves as ideological subjects and prompt them to adopt particularly subject positions that are authorised by the ruling class, if you like. I know that there may well be those of you who prefer the animated films over the live action ones. This may be because animation can be much more direct and a blockbuster needs some semblance of a happy ending, not always but some of the time. The animation is certainly more thoughtful and thought-provoking, and the visual style blends itself perfectly to the dismal, damp and desperate conditions that his characters are in. Even then, there are limitations in terms of what you can show visually in Korea. In terms of animation, the scene in which the woman from Hell 2 Lives come home and she finds her boyfriend in bed with another woman pixelates out the genital area. South Korea has a strict censorship system, although with the growth of streaming co-productions with the West, such rigid rules are being questioned. In Korea, broadcasters often blur or pixelate illicit adult content or simply fade black just before a kiss to avoid showing it. It is interesting to look at the work of a director who crosses over mediums, and you can clearly see how his work as an animator has given director YEON a great sense of space, action and place. There is more you can do in an animation than a live action film, even in terms of generating sympathy or empathy for a protagonist. If I was to suggest a starting point for those new to the films of YEON, I would recommend his early animation, including my favourite, Love is Poutine. Perhaps it's because I'm a lapsed vegetarian. Of course, there is Train to Busan, which put YEON on the cinematic map as a director of large-scale action films. I would also like to recommend The Ugly, although this hasn't been released in the UK yet. I think it's very important for directors to be able to crowd please but also self-please. And by that I mean make a big budget action film that will bring in viewers and revenue, and also to be able to make small budget films that enable you to tell different stories in different ways. The Japanese director Shimizu, who I talk about in a later episode, is well known as one of the original J-horror directors, but his low-budget art film Marabito is often left out of discussions of his work, and yet arguably it's one of his best films. As technology becomes more advanced, we are faced with pressing questions of what cinema is and what divides mainstream cinema from art cinema. And yet this year we're seeing the unprecedented success of young directors who got their start on social media with their first films, Corey Baker's Obsession, Mark Fisber's On Long, and Kane Parker's Backrooms. For the next episode, we turn to the films of YEON Sang-ho. I will be looking mainly at a segment in If You Were Me called The Weight of Her, the 2014 Rolling Home with a Bull, and the 2018 Little Forest, a gothic tale made from ghostly memories as a young woman comes to terms with the death of her mother and finds a place for herself in the world. If you have a director you want to suggest, let me know. If you have any questions or you want to add anything, again, let me know.